No gentleman will want you, Priscilla. Mrs. Henrietta Kirkham said it lightly enough to make two ladies near the window pretend they had not heard, and cruelly enough that Priscilla felt every word settle in the room like dust no servant could sweep away. But that came later. At 4 o'clock on the 22nd of May, 1817, Elmstead House still wore the polished face of respectability. The silver tea urn shone. Henrietta received callers beneath a portrait of her late husband while Priscilla made ease appear effortless. She remembered that Mrs. Vane took no sugar, that Lady Julia Summercoat preferred weak tea, and that Miss Rotherham's mother must never be seated where the Westlight caught her spectacles. Priscilla managed cups, introductions, and silences. Nobody thanked her because things done perfectly were easily mistaken for things that required no labor at all. She wore dove-grey muslin and, at the back of her dark hair, her mother's tortoiseshell comb, amber brown, carved with wheat ears, and missing one narrow tooth. Henrietta noticed it at once. "That's rather ornamental for you, isn't it?" she murmured. "You've become careless about appearing subdued." More than 15 months had passed since Priscilla's mother died, but Henrietta still spoke of grief as though it were a garment she alone had the right to fasten. "It was Mamma's," Priscilla said. "I know whose it was." Henrietta smiled toward an approaching guest. "That isn't what I said." The front bell sounded. A moment later, the footman entered with a salver bearing a single cream visiting card. Henrietta extended 2 fingers before Priscilla could properly look. "Give it to me." The footman obeyed. Priscilla was poring for Lady Julia and saw only the edge of engraved black lettering before Henrietta turned the card. Lady Julia, seated nearest the mantel, looked up sharply. Her gaze rested for one instant on the reverse. Then Henrietta folded her fingers over it. "A mistake," she said. "See that it is returned." The footman hesitated. "Yes, madam." He took the card and left. "Who was it?" asked Mrs. Vane. "No one expected." The room flowed on. Priscilla did not ask. She had learned long ago that curiosity directed toward her own life was treated at Elmstead as vanity. Once, when she was younger, she had asked whether a gentleman who called during her absence had left a message. Henrietta had replied that a woman who counted callers invited disappointment. Priscilla had remembered the correction more clearly than the gentleman. After that, she had stopped asking. It had seemed dignified at the time. Now, passing Lady Julia with a fresh cup, she found the other woman watching her too intently, as though a piece of ordinary household business had suddenly become something else. By 5:30, only 2 guests and Lady Julia remained. Priscilla began gathering cups. Henrietta waited until a maid had gone before saying, "I am told you have been writing to Mrs. Marchmorn." Priscilla placed a spoon upon its saucer. "Yes." "Without mentioning it to me." "I did mention that I intended to seek a paid position." "You said you were considering it." Henrietta's voice sharpened. "That isn't the same thing as arranging to leave my house." Priscilla met her gaze. "Mrs. Marchmorn has offered me a position as companion. I accepted yesterday. Her carriage will collect me tomorrow morning." One of the lingering ladies became very interested in fastening her glove. Henrietta stared. "You accepted?" "I did." "And what do you imagine you will gain by becoming a paid dependent in another woman's house?" Priscilla looked around the drawing room she had managed without wages, where invitations had been answered in her handwriting and every comfort arranged by her attention. Payment would be one distinction. Lady Julia's mouth tightened, almost a smile. Henrietta's face went cold. "You are 31 years old, Priscilla. You are no beauty. You have no fortune worth speaking of. You have spent years making yourself useful because usefulness is what remains when a woman has missed her better opportunities." Priscilla felt the old instinct to make herself smaller. She pressed it down. "Then usefulness ought to be worth a wage." Silence fell. Henrietta glanced toward the guests and chose cruelty over retreat. "No gentleman will want you, Priscilla. You will discover soon enough what independence is worth when nobody asks for you." The word struck an old bruise. Priscilla had watched younger women marry and acquaintances stop asking whether there was anyone in her life. She had become the woman trusted with shawls, music sheets, medicines, and secrets. Nobody asked. Therefore nobody wished to. Her hand almost rose toward the comb in her hair. She stopped it. "Then I shall have one advantage," she said. Her voice did not shake. "I shall know that whatever usefulness I offer is given by choice. Paid usefulness is preferable to unpaid dependence." One guest looked down. The other flushed. Lady Julia looked directly at Priscilla. Henrietta's smile thinned. "You will regret speaking to me that way." "Perhaps. But I won't regret leaving honestly." Priscilla carried the tray into the small morning room across the hall and released a slow breath. The house seemed different already. Not kinder. Simply temporary. Tomorrow, at least, would contain wages honestly named, duties honestly agreed, and a room in Mrs. Marchmont's Dorking house that Priscilla had accepted for herself. She had not imagined such modest freedoms would feel brave. She had imagined they would feel small. Yet standing there with her pulse still unsteady, she understood that leaving Elmstead mattered precisely because no one had invited her to do it. The drawing-room door opened behind her. Lady Julia entered alone. "Miss Bexford." Priscilla straightened. "Lady Julia. Forgive me, but I need to ask you something plainly. Why did you return my brother's card?" Priscilla stared at her. "Your brother's?" "Alexander's. The Duke of Wenslade called upon you this afternoon." Priscilla remembered the cream card. Henrietta's fingers closing over it. The footman's hesitation. "I didn't return anything." Julia went still. "You didn't see it?" "No, you didn't tell Mrs. Kirkham that you wished it sent back." "I didn't know it existed." Julia's face changed. Anger entered it with frightening quietness. Priscilla's heartbeat thudded once. "What was written on it?" Julia lowered her voice. "I saw only because your aunt turned it over before she covered it with her hand. Alexander had written, for Miss Bexford, if she permits me to call again." Priscilla could not answer. The words she had heard all afternoon rearranged themselves into something worse than insult. "Nobody asks for you." What if someone had? What if this was not the first time a door had closed without her knowing? Lady Julia studied her face. "Did you refuse him before today?" "No. Did you know he meant to call?" "No, and you are leaving at dawn." "Mrs. Marchmont's carriage is expected at 7. Julia nodded once. "Then my brother needs to know before you go." Priscilla caught her wrist lightly. "Lady Julia, I don't want him summoned because you feel sorry for me." Julia looked at her hand, then back at her face. "I'm not sending for him because I feel sorry for you." For the first time that day, Priscilla had no prepared answer. Lady Julia crossed the hall and called for writing paper. Within minutes, an express was being prepared for London, while upstairs Priscilla began to pack for Dorking with her mother's comb still in her hair and one impossible question refusing to leave her mind: how many times had someone knocked at the door of her life and been told, without her knowledge, that she was not receiving? Near midnight, the returned card still lay on Alexander Summercoat's desk exactly where he had placed it hours earlier, cream stock against dark leather, his own handwriting visible when he turned it over. "For Miss Bexford, if she permits me to call again." He had written the words himself that afternoon because a formal card alone had seemed too easy to misunderstand. Priscilla Bexford was not a débutante waiting to count victories in a season. She was 31, self-possessed, and so careful never to demand attention that Alexander had spent months wondering whether she would welcome his. When the card came back without a message, he had accepted the answer. A refusal did not become less binding because a duke disliked it. He had told himself that before dinner. He had told himself the same thing while changing for an evening engagement. By 11, he had almost succeeded in believing it. Then the night porter brought in Lady Julia's express. Alexander recognized his sister's hand before the seal was broken. Julia did not waste expresses on gossip. He read the first line standing. By the last, he had gone completely still. Priscilla had never seen the card. Mrs. Kirkham had returned it. Priscilla was leaving Elmstead at 7 in the morning for a paid companion position near Dorking. Worse, Julia had heard Henrietta humiliate her before guests and had discovered that Priscilla believed Alexander had never approached her at all. Alexander looked back at the card. A few hours earlier, it had meant no. Now it meant someone had taken a question meant for one woman and answered it in her place. His jaw tightened. During 12 years in uniform, he had learned that haste could kill men and hesitation could do the same. Peace had seemed simpler until he inherited Wenslade and discovered that power distorted every room he entered. People agreed too quickly. Servants apologized before he complained. Mothers smiled before he spoke to their daughters. That was precisely why he had waited before approaching Priscilla. He had wanted one answer from her that could not be blamed upon pressure. Instead, his caution had made the deception easier. Alexander crossed to the bell and pulled once. His valet appeared moments later, coat hastily fastened. "Your Grace?" "Riding clothes." "My dark coat." "I leave within 10 minutes." The man blinked. "Tonight?" "Yes." "Shall I have the carriage brought round?" "No." "A horse?" "And send word ahead to Cobham for a fresh mount." His valet hesitated only long enough to understand that the decision was final. "Yes, Your Grace." Alexander folded Julia's letter and placed it inside his dispatch case. The calling card went into the inner breast pocket of his coat. He would not leave the one tangible proof of the misunderstanding behind. At the door, his valet returned carrying gloves. "Will Your Grace be back for the morning appointments?" Alexander took them. "Cancel them." "All of them?" "All." A quieter voice spoke from the corridor. "Alexander." His household senior housekeeper stood several paces away, grey hair tucked beneath a cap. She had served his mother and still occasionally addressed him with the alarmed familiarity of someone who remembered him muddy at 14. "You are going out at this hour?" "Surrey." "In the middle of the night?" "Mrs. Kirkham has been answering for Miss Bexford." The housekeeper frowned. "Answering what?" Alexander put on one glove. "Me." Understanding came slowly, followed by something close to indignation. "Then I hope you asked the young lady herself this time." He looked at her. "That is exactly what I intend to do." London thinned around him beneath a pale moon and scattered lamps. By the time he passed the last end streets, the air had turned colder and cleaner. Alexander did not ride recklessly. Recklessness would have been theatrical, and he had no desire to arrive at Elmstead with a blown horse merely to prove an emotion Priscilla had never asked him to feel. He kept a demanding but sustainable pace, easing where the road required it and pushing only where the ground allowed. The card seemed almost absurdly light against his chest. Yet every few miles his attention returned to it. He remembered the first evening he had truly noticed Priscilla. Not because she had entered a room beautifully. She had not entered at all. She had already been there, standing beside an elderly woman whose shawl had caught awkwardly on the back of a chair. 3 people had seen the mishap. Priscilla alone had corrected it without making the woman feel foolish. She had shifted the chair, freed the fringe, and continued the conversation as though nothing had happened. Alexander, who had spent years watching men turn small mistakes into public wounds, had remembered that kindness because it demanded no witness. Later he had seen Priscilla guide an anxious young guest through an introduction, rescue a hostess from an unanswered question, and retreat each time before gratitude could settle upon her. At first he had called it discretion. Then intelligence. Then he had stopped pretending he was merely observing. Near Cobham, a sleepy ostler brought out the fresh horse arranged by messenger. Alexander dismounted with stiffness already gathering across his thighs. He rubbed the first horse's neck before handing over the reins. "Walk him properly before you give him water." "Yes, Your Grace." The ostler glanced toward the dark road ahead. "Long way still." "Far enough." "Road's decent toward Guildford, barring ruts after the last rain. Alexander mounted again. Then I shall be grateful for decent. The second horse was fresh and forward. Dawn had not yet begun, but the eastern sky was losing some of its blackness. Alexander calculated the remaining miles. If Julia's message was accurate, Priscilla's carriage would arrive at 7. He could reach Elmstead before that, unless a wheel blockage, lame horse, or damaged road delayed him. For the first time in years, a deadline tightened something in him that felt uncomfortably like fear. Not fear that Priscilla would leave. Dorking was not exile. He could call there properly on another day. The fear was subtler. If she left Elmstead still believing nobody had asked for her, then Henrietta's lie would accompany her into the next chapter of her life. Alexander could not tolerate that. He could not decide what Priscilla should feel about him. He could decide she would know the truth before choosing. As the road dipped and rose through the Surrey darkness, he remembered Julia's final line. She does not want pity. Do not bring it. Alexander had almost smiled when he read it. Priscilla's pride was not vanity. It was structure. Remove it and she would not become softer. She would become less herself. He had no intention of arriving like a rescuer. He was going to Elmstead because one question remained unanswered, and because it belonged to Priscilla alone. The sky turned grey at the edges. Birds began in hedges before the houses woke. Alexander's shoulders ached beneath the riding coat. His hands had gone cold despite the gloves, and mud darkened one boot where a wheel rut had splashed the road. None of it mattered. When the first familiar lane toward Elmstead appeared, he slowed enough to spare the horse on the final rise. Somewhere beyond those trees, Priscilla might already be dressed for departure. She might look at him and say that she had no wish to receive him now either. If she did, he would accept it. That certainty calmed him more than any hope could have done. He touched the breast of his coat once, feeling the square edge of the returned card beneath the fabric. Then he urged the horse onward as the first thin light of morning spread across Surrey, carrying him toward a woman who had never refused him, and whose answer he was finally determined to hear from her own lips. The first sound Priscilla heard was not the carriage from Dorking but the hard, measured beat of a horse coming up the Elmstead drive before sunrise. She had been standing in the entrance hall with one gloved hand resting on the handle of her small travelling trunk, listening to the house wake reluctantly around her. A maid had carried down her valise. The footman had not yet appeared. Lady Julia, who had insisted upon remaining overnight after sending her express, stood near the window in a dark travelling cloak, watching the grey morning gather beyond the glass. Henrietta had not come downstairs. Priscilla had almost been grateful for that. She had slept little. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the cream visiting card disappearing beneath her aunt's fingers. The hoofbeats grew louder. Julia turned sharply. Priscilla's pulse stumbled. "That isn't Mrs. Marchmont's carriage." "No," Julia said. She moved toward the window, then stopped. "It's my brother." Priscilla did not answer. Alexander Summercoat rode into view with his coat darkened by road damp and mud splashed high on one boot. He drew the horse down before the steps rather than allowing it to come in hot, then dismounted with a stiffness he could not entirely conceal. Even through the window, Priscilla saw him pause once with a hand against the saddle before straightening. He had ridden through the night. The realization was too large to feel romantic. At first it felt almost alarming. A duke did not cross Surrey before dawn for a woman who had never been given the chance to answer him. Yet there he was. The front door opened before a servant could reach it because Julia herself pulled it wide. "Alexander!" "Julia!" His voice was roughened by cold and fatigue. He stepped inside, bringing the scent of damp leather and early morning with him. Then he saw Priscilla. Whatever greeting he might have prepared disappeared. He removed his hat. Miss Bexford. She had seen him immaculate in drawing rooms, controlled at dinners, almost severe beneath chandeliers. She had never seen his hair disordered by wind or the edge of exhaustion around his eyes. His gloves were marked from the rains. He looked human in a way that made his rank seem, for one dangerous moment, irrelevant. "Your Grace." He glanced at her trunk. "I am not too late. Mrs. Marchmont's carriage is expected at 7. Then I am in time to ask a question." Footsteps sounded on the stairs. Henrietta entered in a hastily arranged morning gown, her expression moving from annoyance to astonishment in the space of one breath. "Your Grace. We had no notion you would honor us so early." Alexander's eyes shifted toward her. His courtesy remained intact, but warmth did not. "Mrs. Kirkham." Henrietta descended the remaining steps. "If this concerns my niece's unfortunate behavior yesterday, I assure you there has been a misunderstanding. That is precisely what I have come to discover. Then perhaps we should speak privately. I should prefer to speak to Miss Bexford." Henrietta stopped. Alexander continued before she could object. "With Lady Julia present." The distinction was quiet and absolute. Priscilla felt something inside her loosen, not because he had challenged Henrietta, but because he had not replaced one form of control with another. He was not asking permission to decide her future. He was asking access to her answer. Henrietta's mouth tightened. "At this hour, surely propriety, my sister is here." Julia folded her arms. "And I am awake enough to chaperone." Priscilla almost smiled. "Almost." Alexander looked back at her. "Miss Bexford, may I have 5 minutes?" She considered him deliberately. The old instinct urged her to make his journey worthwhile, to reward effort because effort had been made. She rejected it. "Yes." They moved into the small morning room across the hall. Julia remained near the open door. Henrietta came as far as the threshold, but Julia's position prevented her from entering without making the intrusion obvious. Alexander did not sit. Priscilla noticed his right hand tighten once at his side, as though the joints had stiffened from cold. "Your Grace, you should sit down." His brows lifted. "I beg your pardon. You have ridden most of the night, unless Surrey has become considerably nearer London since yesterday." A tired glint appeared in his eyes. "It has not." "Then please sit before dignity becomes an injury." He gave a short laugh, so unexpected that Julia looked over from the doorway. Alexander obeyed. "Thank you." "You are welcome." He reached inside his coat and withdrew the cream card. Priscilla recognized the edge of it at once. He held it carefully between 2 fingers but did not offer it yet. "I sent this to Elmstead yesterday afternoon. Lady Julia told me. It was returned to me." He turned the card so she could see the handwritten words on the reverse. "For Miss Bexford, if she permits me to call again." Her throat tightened. The handwriting made Julia's account real in a way memory could not soften. Alexander watched her face. "Did you send this back to me?" "No." "Did you ask anyone to return it for you?" "No." "Did you know it had arrived?" "Not until your sister told me." He looked down at the card for one moment, then closed his fingers around it. Anger passed across his face, restrained but unmistakable. "Then I owe you an apology." Priscilla frowned. "For what?" "For accepting an answer that was not yours." "You could not have known." "No. But I could have asked more carefully. If you had, you might have been accused of refusing to accept a lady's rejection." "I considered that." His mouth hardened slightly. "Which is why I did not ask again." The honesty of it unsettled her more than flattery would have done. He had not been offended by the apparent refusal. He had respected it. Henrietta's interference had used his restraint against them both. Priscilla folded her hands in her lap. "Why did you send the card at all?" Alexander was silent long enough that the question became intimate. "Because I wish to see you." "Socially?" "At first." "And now?" He met her eyes. "Now I would like permission to pay my addresses." Her breath caught. From the doorway, Julia became very still. Priscilla heard the faint movement of Henrietta beyond the hall and knew her aunt was listening. That knowledge hardened something useful in her. Because Lady Julia wrote to you. No, because she told you what was said to me. No, because you felt I had been treated badly. That made me angry. It did not make me court you. Priscilla looked at the mud on his boot, the weariness he was no longer able to hide, the card still held in his hand. Then why ride all this way? Alexander's expression changed. The answer, when it came, was quieter than she expected. Because yesterday I believed you had refused me. Last night I learned you had never been asked. I could tolerate the first. I could not tolerate the second. Silence settled between them. Priscilla felt the force of his words, but she did not let them decide for her. I have accepted Mrs. Marchmont's position. I know. I am still going. Good. She blinked. Good? You chose it before I arrived. I would not think better of myself if my appearance caused you to abandon your own decision. Something almost painful moved through her chest. And if I permit your courtship? Then I shall call upon you in Dorking, at proper hours, in whatever manner Mrs. Marchmont considers respectable. You make it sound very orderly. I am trying not to frighten you with the disorderly part. Her gaze dropped to his gloves. His fingers had begun to tremble slightly, whether from fatigue or cold she could not tell. Your Grace, the disorderly part has mud on its boots. This time his smile came fully. It transformed him. I had hoped you might laugh before you thanked me. I have not thanked you. No, his eyes warmed. You have not. Priscilla let the silence remain. Then she said, you may pay your addresses. Alexander did not move at once. May I? You may. And you reserve the right to dismiss me? Entirely. Then I understand the terms. He rose carefully. The stiffness in his legs was more evident now. Priscilla stood as well. For a moment they faced each other with nothing settled except the right to begin. It felt more meaningful than certainty. Outside, wheels sounded faintly on the road. Mrs. Marchmont's carriage. Henrietta appeared in the doorway at once. Priscilla, surely you cannot mean to leave now. Priscilla turned toward her aunt. Yesterday, those words might have sounded like authority. This morning they sounded merely late. I do. Henrietta looked at Alexander. Your Grace, perhaps you might persuade her to reconsider. Alexander glanced at Priscilla, then back at Henrietta. I have no intention of persuading Miss Bexford to abandon a choice she has made for herself. The carriage rolled into the drive. Priscilla felt her mother's comb secure in her hair, her trunk waiting in the hall, and the strange new weight of a future no one had fully arranged. Alexander stepped aside to let her pass first. As she crossed the threshold, she looked at Julia. How many cards never reached me? Julia's expression lost all amusement. I do not know. Priscilla looked once toward Henrietta, who had gone pale. Then she walked out to the waiting carriage, carrying with her not an answer, but a question far more dangerous to Elmsted than any duke's courtship. By the second morning at Mrs. Marchmont's house near Dorking, Priscilla had discovered that honest employment possessed a sound she had never heard at Elmsted, the quiet click of a door closing at the end of agreed hours. Mrs. Marchmont was a widow of 62 with a dry wit, a weak left knee, and no patience for pretending dependence was generosity. On Priscilla's first evening, she had shown her the small blue bedchamber overlooking the kitchen garden, explained that breakfast was at 8, correspondence at 9, reading aloud after luncheon, and that unless they were visiting or receiving company, Priscilla's time after 4 belonged to herself. Then she had placed a folded paper on the escritoire listing wages and household expenses with such plainness that Priscilla had stared at it longer than good manners permitted. Is something wrong? Mrs. Marchmont had asked. No, Priscilla had touched the paper with one finger. Nothing is wrong. The older woman had studied her. Then you've been badly employed before. I wasn't employed. Ah. Mrs. Marchmont's expression had sharpened. That explains more. She had said nothing further, and Priscilla had been grateful. There was no pity in the room. Only terms. By the 24th of May, Priscilla had already answered 2 letters, sorted a muddled subscription list, and read 3 chapters of a travel account while Mrs. Marchmont rested her knee. At 11, the widow dismissed her with a nod toward the window. You have an hour before luncheon. Walk, write, stare at a wall. I don't pay for minutes I haven't purchased. Priscilla almost laughed. Instead, she went upstairs and opened the small purse in which Mrs. Marchmont had placed the first portion of her wages in advance. The coins were not a fortune. They were scarcely enough to alter a life by themselves. Yet their weight in her palm felt different from anything Henrietta had ever given her. They were not allowance, favor, or gratitude. They named the value of work. She closed the purse and placed it inside her drawer beneath folded gloves. Her mother's tortoiseshell comb rested beside them, one tooth still missing, the carved wheat ears worn smooth where her mother's fingers had once touched them. Priscilla picked it up, fastened it into her hair, and went downstairs when the bell announced callers. Lady Julia arrived first. She was accompanied by Mrs. Harbury, a married woman Priscilla knew slightly from Surrey gatherings. Mrs. Marchmont received them in the front parlour, then glanced at Priscilla. You may stay if you wish. You are my companion, not my footstool. Thank you. Julia's eyes warmed at that. Mrs. Harbury settled into a chair and began with harmless county news. For several minutes, nothing remarkable passed. Then, after mentioning Elmstead, she hesitated. Miss Bexford, I hope you will forgive a personal question. Priscilla set down her cup. I shall try. Mrs. Harbury gave a nervous smile. My brother was astonished when he heard you had left Mrs. Kirkham's house. He had always believed you preferred seclusion. Priscilla felt Julia's attention sharpen. Why would he believe that? Because he called on you twice last autumn. Mrs. Harbury's embarrassment deepened. Both times he was told you did not receive gentlemen. For a moment, Priscilla heard nothing except the faint china rattle as Mrs. Marchmont placed her cup in its saucer. Your brother called on me. Yes. Once in October and once again, I think, in early November. Priscilla remembered both weeks. She had been at Elmstead. In October, Henrietta had complained that Priscilla spent too much time indoors because the rain spoiled the walks. In November, Priscilla had spent 3 consecutive afternoons correcting invitations for a dinner Henrietta later described as exhausting. She had not been secluded. She had not refused callers. She had simply never been told they came. Mrs. Harbury looked distressed. I assumed you knew. I did not. Then I am very sorry. You have nothing to apologize for. The answer came automatically, but this time Priscilla heard the habit inside it. She folded her hands together. Did your brother leave cards? I believe so. Did he ever receive a message from me directly? Not that he mentioned. Julia leaned forward. Was he told Miss Bexford was unwell? No. Only that she did not receive gentlemen. The words were almost identical to the suspicion Priscilla had carried from Elmstead. Her mind moved backward through years of closed afternoons, through calls she had assumed were meant for Henrietta, through servants entering and leaving drawing rooms while Priscilla copied lists in the morning room. There was no proof of anything beyond these incidents. She knew that. Pain could make patterns where none existed, and she would not accuse Henrietta because 2 memories now aligned badly. Still, something inside her had shifted. Please don't ask your brother to involve himself, Priscilla said. Mrs. Harbury looked surprised. I had not thought, I mean only that I would rather understand what happened before anyone decides what it means. Julia watched her closely. You are protecting your aunt. No, Priscilla's voice remained calm. I am protecting the truth from my anger. Mrs. Marchmont's brows lifted in approval. A useful distinction. Julia sat back. Very well. I will ask nothing of anyone without your permission. Priscilla looked at her. Thank you. The front bell sounded again. A servant entered moments later carrying a card on a small tray. This time, Mrs. Marchmont did not reach for it. She glanced toward Priscilla instead. "For you." The difference was so simple that it hurt. Priscilla took the card herself. The engraving read, "The Duke of Wenslade." There was no handwriting on the reverse. No secret message. No intermediary meaning. Just a proper morning call made at a proper hour. She lifted her eyes. "Will you receive him?" Mrs. Marchmont asked. Priscilla looked toward Julia, who was trying with limited success not to smile. "Yes." Alexander entered 2 minutes later looking entirely unlike the man who had arrived at Elmstead before dawn. He was rested, shaved, properly dressed, and so controlled that only Priscilla knew how mud-streaked and exhausted he had been the morning before. He bowed first to Mrs. Marchmont, then to Julia and Mrs. Harbury, and finally to Priscilla. "Miss Bexford." "Your Grace." His eyes held hers a fraction longer than formality required. "I trust Dorking has not disappointed you." "Not yet." Mrs. Marchmont spoke from her chair. "Give us time. We have only had her 2 days." Alexander smiled. "I shall reserve judgment." The ease of the exchange surprised Priscilla. No one treated her employment as an embarrassment to be excused. Alexander asked Mrs. Marchmont about her knee, listened to Mrs. Harbury describe a family visit, and did not attempt to pull Priscilla apart from the room as though courtship meant possession. Only later, when Mrs. Marchmont asked Priscilla to show him the small terrace garden while keeping the door open behind them, did they have any privacy. Alexander walked beside her without hurrying. "Julia wrote that you settled well." "She reports on me." "Only in ways intended to prevent me from behaving foolishly." "Is that a demanding occupation?" "Increasingly." Priscilla glanced at him. "I learned something this morning." His expression changed at once. "About the card." "About another gentleman." "Last autumn. He called twice and was told I did not receive gentlemen." Alexander was silent for several steps. "Were you home?" "Both times." His jaw tightened. "Do you want me to ask questions?" No, the answer was immediate. He stopped. "So did she?" "Not yet," Priscilla said. "I do not know enough. I have one returned card from you and one account from Mrs. Harbury. That may be a pattern, or it may be 2 acts with different explanations. I will not turn suspicion into fact because I am hurt." Alexander studied her face. "Then I will do nothing." She had expected persuasion. The absence of it unsettled her more deeply than argument would have done. "Just like that. You said no. And if you think I am making a mistake, I may think many things." His voice softened. "They are not all commands." Priscilla looked away toward the clipped hedge. Somewhere beyond it, a gardener was turning soil. Ordinary work. Honest effort. The world had not transformed simply because a duke had crossed Surrey for her. Yet the terms around her had begun to change. Wages were named. Hours belonged to her. A calling card reached her own hand. A man with enough power to overwhelm half the county had asked what she wanted and accepted the answer. "Mrs. Marchmont paid me yesterday," she said suddenly. Alexander blinked at the turn. "Did she?" "The amount is modest. That is generally how wages begin." It felt immodest. He looked at her more carefully. "Because it was yours?" Priscilla nodded. His expression warmed, not with amusement but understanding. "Then I am glad." No promise followed. No offer to replace the wages tenfold. He did not make her small independence ridiculous by comparing it with ducal wealth. For the first time since leaving Elmstead, Priscilla felt something loosen inside her that had nothing to do with being courted. She had spent years believing nobody came because nobody wished to. Now she knew at least 2 men had crossed a threshold only to be turned back without her knowledge. She did not yet know why. She did know one thing. Someone at Elmstead had been making decisions about her absence while she was standing inside the house. And for the first time, Priscilla intended to find out exactly how many doors had been closed in her name. By the 26th of May, Priscilla had begun to understand that courtship was not a single dramatic act but a series of smaller permissions, each one more revealing than the last. Alexander did not arrive at Mrs. Marchmont's house with flowers large enough to embarrass the drawing-room or gifts expensive enough to turn gratitude into obligation. He came at proper hours. He brought books Mrs. Marchmont had mentioned wanting, not jewels Priscilla had never requested. He spoke to the widow with the respect due to the mistress of the house, and when Priscilla was occupied with correspondence, he waited rather than drawing her away from her work. The restraint affected her more deeply than extravagance might have done. She had spent too many years being useful according to other people's convenience. It was strange to discover that attention could make room for duty instead of competing with it. On the morning of the 27th, Mrs. Marchmont suggested a walk after luncheon, announcing that her knee would not carry her farther than the terrace but that Lady Julia, who had arrived for the day, might accompany them along the lower field. "You will stay within sight of the house for the first quarter-mile," she said. "After that, Lady Julia is sufficiently formidable to preserve everyone's virtue." Julia looked offended. "Only sufficiently." Alexander inclined his head. "I have always found her terrifying." "You survived childhood." "Barely." Priscilla laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised her enough that she glanced away, but Alexander had already heard it. His expression softened in a way that made her unexpectedly self-conscious. They set out beneath a mild sky, Lady Julia walking several paces ahead whenever the path widened and falling back whenever it narrowed, performing the duties of a chaperone without pretending not to notice the absurdities of them. The countryside beyond Mrs. Marchmont's garden rolled gently toward hedged fields and low wooded rises. Priscilla carried no parasol because the sun was weak, only her gloves and the small sense of freedom that still accompanied every hour she could name as her own. Alexander walked beside her without setting a pace she had to match. "You seem different here," he said after a time. "Different from Elmstead?" "Yes." "Less useful?" "More visible?" The answer unsettled her. "I am still useful. I did not mean to suggest otherwise." "I know." She looked toward the field. It is simply strange to hear usefulness and visibility spoken of as separate things. Alexander was quiet for several steps. "Were they ever separate at Elmstead?" "Not often." Then perhaps that was the problem. She glanced at him. "You are very willing to find faults in a household after visiting it only occasionally." "I am willing to find faults in any system that hides the person doing the work." "That sounds political." "It is only observant." "Which is worse?" His mouth curved. "Probably." They reached a stretch of path bordered by hawthorn. Lady Julia had moved ahead to inspect a patch of bluebells with suspicious interest. Priscilla suspected deliberate discretion and chose not to call her back. Alexander looked toward the hedge, then at Priscilla. "May I tell you when I first noticed you?" The question caught her off guard. "I had assumed it was recently." "No, then when?" "Last November. At the Harbury dinner." She searched her memory. "I barely spoke to you." "You did not speak to me at all." "That seems a poor beginning for courtship." "It was not courtship then." His expression shifted, becoming more thoughtful. A young woman had been introduced to the room. She mistook one gentleman's title and called him by his brother's rank. 3 people laughed. Not loudly, but enough. Priscilla remembered. The girl had been 17 and painfully nervous, recently arrived from the country. "Miss Avery." "Yes." You changed the subject before anyone could correct her in public. Then you found a reason to mention the gentleman properly 10 minutes later, when no one was watching. Priscilla looked at him. "You saw that?" "I did. Most people saw only the mistake." "That was precisely why I remembered you." She felt warmth rise beneath her composure. "You make kindness sound like strategy." Sometimes it is. And sometimes it is simply kindness. I know. His voice lowered. That is why it mattered. Priscilla looked down at the path. She had spent years becoming skilled at small rescues because no one noticed them. Now one man had. The knowledge sat uncomfortably close to tenderness. Then I suppose it is fair that I tell you when I noticed you. Alexander's brows lifted. Please do. At Lord Wetherell's supper last winter. That narrows it badly. You were speaking with a young officer. He stilled slightly. Captain Fenton. Yes. He was trying to explain why his regiment had missed a courier connection. He was nervous. Alexander gave a short breath. He was expecting me to correct him in front of half the table. But you did not. He was wrong. I know. So did everyone else. I know that too. You let him finish. Then you asked him to walk with you afterward. Alexander looked away for a moment, almost embarrassed. He had already humiliated himself enough. Exactly. Their eyes met. Something passed between them that had nothing to do with rank or scandal. It was recognition. Not admiration of grand gestures, but of restraint. The kind that spared another person unnecessary shame. Priscilla realized with a small start that perhaps this was why his overnight ride had not frightened her as much as it should have. The dramatic act rested upon a quieter habit she already understood. They continued until the path reached a low stile separating the meadow from a narrow lane. Lady Julia had stopped on the other side and was pretending to study a distant farmhouse. Alexander stepped forward first, then turned. He held out his hand. He did not take hers. He simply offered it. The distinction was so slight that another woman might not have noticed. Priscilla did. For 1 second she saw Henrietta's fingers closing over a card that had been meant for her. She saw doors, choices, decisions made without consultation. Then she looked at Alexander's open palm. May I? He asked. Yes. She placed her gloved hand in his. His fingers closed carefully around hers, steady and warm. The touch lasted only as long as it took her to cross, but it was intentional in a way that made her pulse change. When both her feet were safely on the lane, he released her at once. Thank you, she said. For the style. For asking. His gaze held hers. I am beginning to understand that I should. They walked more slowly after that. Near the turn back toward the house, Alexander spoke again. War taught me to decide quickly. Sometimes before I possessed all the information I wanted. Priscilla listened. And peace. Peace has not yet taught me when waiting is wiser. You seem to be learning. Under demanding instruction. I charge nothing. That makes it more dangerous. She smiled. Yet beneath the ease, his words remained with her. He had offered something more personal than anecdote. Not a confession, exactly, but a flaw spoken without disguise. It made him less polished and therefore easier to trust. The next afternoon, that trust was tested not by Alexander but by news from Elmstead. Mrs. Marchmorn received a note from an acquaintance who had heard, with suspicious concern, that Priscilla had engineered her departure from Henrietta's house to provoke the Duke of Wenslade into following her. By evening, Lady Julia had heard a sharper version. Henrietta was telling selected callers that Priscilla had created a family quarrel so publicly that Alexander had been forced, as a matter of honor, to intervene. Priscilla read Julia's summary twice. The paper remained steady in her hand. Do you want me to answer it? Alexander asked when Julia told him the same thing during his call. Priscilla looked up. How? I could make it clear that my interest began before you left Elmstead. That would help. Then I shall. She held his gaze. But only if you say exactly what is true. Nothing more. What would more be? Humiliating my aunt because you can. His expression hardened, then eased. You think I would? I think you are angry. I am. So am I. Priscilla folded Julia's note. That does not make anger evidence. Alexander was silent. Then he nodded. Very well. No grand correction. No grand correction. No threat. No threat. No turning me into a woman who needed a duke to explain her own conduct. Something almost like pain crossed his face. Never that. The certainty in his answer reached her more deeply than she wanted. Before either could say more, Mrs. Marchmont entered carrying a fresh invitation. Box Hill, she announced. Mrs. Kirkham is hosting a picnic and has invited us all in the spirit of reconciliation. Julia gave a humorless laugh. Priscilla took the card and read Henrietta's elegant hand. Alexander watched her. You do not have to go. Priscilla looked at the invitation, then at him. No, she folded it once. But I think I will. By the 29th of May, the rumor had acquired the polished manners of a respectable lie. It no longer arrived as accusation. It came wrapped in concern. Mrs. Marchmont received one note regretting that family disagreements had become public, another expressing hope that Miss Bexford had not been misled by sudden attention, and a third from a woman Priscilla scarcely knew who delicately observed that grief sometimes made ladies susceptible to dramatic attachments. None of the writers named Henrietta. They did not need to. Every sentence carried the same implication. Priscilla had rejected society while mourning her mother, then changed her account of the past when the Duke of Wenslade showed interest. The cruelty of it lay not in invention alone, but in the use of something true. Priscilla had grieved. She had worn darker colors longer than some women thought necessary. She had avoided crowded assemblies in the first months after her mother's death. Henrietta had taken those private choices and stretched them into a story in which Priscilla had deliberately refused all gentlemen, thereby absolving anyone who might have spoken in her name. Mrs. Marchmont read one of the notes twice, then folded it with unnecessary precision. Your aunt is either very unlucky in her friends or very skillful with implication. Priscilla looked up from the correspondence ledger. I suspect the second. Do you intend to answer? Not to gossip. Good. Mrs. Marchmont pushed the note aside. Gossip grows fat on being fed. Priscilla smiled faintly, but unease remained. Henrietta had stopped arguing about the returned card itself. Instead, she was creating a broader moral frame around it. If Priscilla had always preferred seclusion, then a card sent back without consultation could be described as kindness. If Priscilla had always rejected male attention, then Alexander's sudden courtship could be made to look like opportunism on Priscilla's part rather than interference on Henrietta's. The story was elegant. That frightened her more than open malice would have done. By afternoon, Lady Julia arrived with information that made the pattern harder to ignore. Seymour has been visiting half the families between Guildford and Leatherhead, she said without preamble once Mrs. Marchmont had dismissed the servants. Not formally. Casually. Conveniently. Priscilla set down her pen. And what is he saying? That you asked Mrs. Kirkham to discourage callers after your mother died. That you found ordinary society painful. That Mrs. Kirkham protected your wishes. Which would make her interference sound charitable. Exactly. Julia's mouth tightened. He also says you became dissatisfied only after Alexander showed interest. Priscilla felt the old ache rise, then settle into something colder. That is clever. You say that as though you admire it. I admire nothing about it. But if I pretend it is foolish, I shall underestimate it. Mrs. Marchmont nodded once. Sensible. Julia leaned forward. There is more. Priscilla waited. The Elmstead footman is gone. Gone where? Dismissed. The word landed differently than rumor. When? Yesterday, I believe. Priscilla thought immediately of the man carrying Alexander's cream card on a salver, of his slight hesitation when Henrietta ordered it returned. She had not known his name well enough to use it easily, but she remembered his face. He had served at Elmstead for more than 2 years. Why was he dismissed? Seymour says insolence. Do you believe him? Julia gave her a look. No. Priscilla rose and crossed to the window. The garden beyond Mrs. Marchmont's parlour was quiet, clipped and orderly. Nothing in it suggested the shape of a door closing behind a servant whose livelihood depended upon references written by the very household he might contradict. If he carried out the instructions regarding callers, he may know more than anyone else. I thought the same. Julia lowered her voice. And Seymour may have thought it before either of us. Priscilla turned. Has anyone spoken to the footman? Not that I know. Then no one should yet. Julia frowned. You do not want to find him. I do. But not through Alexander. Understanding flickered in Julia's eyes. Mrs. Marchmont looked from one woman to the other. Because a duke searching for a dismissed servant would not look like inquiry. It would look like pressure. Yes, Priscilla said. If the man speaks, I want him to speak because he chooses to. Not because he thinks refusal might cost him whatever remains of his prospects. Julia nodded slowly. I can make discreet inquiries through household contacts. Only to learn where he has gone. Nothing more. Nothing more. The matter should have ended there for the day. It did not. Near 5, Alexander arrived. He was admitted at once, his card carried directly to Mrs. Marchmont, who glanced at Priscilla before telling the servant, show his grace in. The small courtesy still struck Priscilla with painful force. A question. An answer. No one substituted. Alexander entered with the controlled ease she had come to recognize, but his eyes moved quickly between Julia and Priscilla. Something has happened. Julia did not soften it. Seymour dismissed the Elmstead footman. Alexander's expression hardened. The one who returned my card. The same. Priscilla watched the change in him. His shoulders became still. The warmth left his face. It was the first glimpse she had seen of the military man beneath the Duke, the part of him that responded to obstruction by identifying the shortest route through it. I will speak to Seymour. No, Priscilla said. Alexander looked at her. He dismissed a servant who may know why your card was returned. I know. If Seymour is intimidating him, then your appearance will not reduce the intimidation. His jaw tightened. I can make it clear the man has nothing to fear. From you. From anyone connected with me. Priscilla shook her head. That is exactly the problem. Silence gathered. Julia shifted slightly but did not intervene. Priscilla continued. If you find him, question him, offer him protection, and then he supports my account, what will Henrietta say? Alexander knew the answer. She saw it in his face before he spoke. That I purchased his loyalty. Or frightened it into him. I would do neither. I know that. Her voice softened. But truth must survive what people can say about it. Alexander looked away for a moment. When he faced her again, the anger remained, but it had changed direction. What do you want me to do? The question mattered. Priscilla felt it more sharply because she knew action would be easier for him. Come to Box Hill if you still wish to. I do. Stand beside me. She held his gaze. Not in front of me. Something in his expression eased. I can do that. And if Henrietta says something untrue? I answer only what I personally know. Yes. No grand correction. No grand correction. No threat. A faint shadow of humor returned. You have made that rule remarkably memorable. Good. He studied her for a moment. You are going, then. Priscilla thought of Henrietta's invitation lying upstairs. She had considered refusing it. Dignity did not require walking willingly into cruelty. Yet absence now carried meaning Henrietta would be eager to supply. Yes. Alexander's gaze dropped briefly to her hands. Are you afraid? Priscilla did not lie. A little. Do you want me there because you are afraid? She considered the question. No, why, then? Because I want you to hear what she says when I am present. He nodded. Then I shall. On the 31st of May, another piece of news reached them. A groom who had once worked at Elmstead told one of Julia's servants that the dismissed footman had been warned before leaving that contradicting the Kirkham household would cost him any respectable reference. Julia brought the message to Dorking at once. Priscilla read the few lines, then folded them. Seymour, she asked. The groom believes so. Believes is not knows. No, Priscilla placed the note aside. Then we do not use it as fact. Julia gave a frustrated sigh. You are infuriatingly consistent. I am trying to be. That evening, Priscilla stood before the small mirror in her room and fastened her mother's tortoiseshell comb into her hair. The missing tooth caught slightly, just as it always had. She adjusted it without hiding the flaw. Tomorrow, Henrietta would have society, family authority, and a story rehearsed in advance. Priscilla would have no public proof yet. Only memory, restraint, and the right to answer for herself. For the first time in her life, she decided that might be enough to enter the room. Box Hill was beautiful enough to make cruelty seem indecent. On the 1st of June, sunlight moved over the high grass in long pale bands, and the air above the Surrey hills carried the clean scent of crushed thyme and warm earth. Henrietta had chosen the place well. There were rugs beneath a stand of beeches, servants arranging hampers, folding stools for the older ladies, chilled bottles wrapped in cloth, and enough well-connected county families to make every gesture visible without the vulgarity of an official gathering. Priscilla understood the design the moment Mrs. Marchmont's carriage came to a stop. This was not reconciliation in private. Henrietta had invited witnesses. Priscilla stepped down with her mother's tortoiseshell comb fastened in her hair, the carved wheat ears catching the light where the amber-brown surface had worn smooth with age. The missing tooth remained hidden against the coil of her hair, but Priscilla knew it was there. She had not worn the comb as defiance. She had worn it because it belonged to her, because it had belonged to her mother, and because grief did not require surrendering everything that once gave pleasure. Mrs. Marchmont descended after her and adjusted one glove. If anyone behaves intolerably, I reserve the right to develop a sudden illness. Priscilla looked at her. Your knee? My imagination. Lady Julia arrived a few minutes later with Alexander. He was dressed for the country rather than London, dark coat plain by ducal standards, his expression controlled enough that only Priscilla noticed the brief hardening of his jaw when he saw Seymour standing beside Henrietta. Alexander came directly to her. Miss Bexford. Your Grace. His gaze searched her face. Do you still want me here? Yes. Beside you. Beside me. Not in front. You remember well. I was instructed severely. A faint smile touched her mouth, but it vanished when Henrietta approached. Priscilla. Her aunt's tone was warm enough for everyone within hearing to admire. I am so pleased you came. I had feared recent misunderstandings might make you avoid us. I saw no reason to avoid you. Henrietta took that answer as gracefully as if it had been affectionate. Then we shall all be relieved. Seymour bowed. Cousin. Mr. Kirkham. His eyes rested briefly on Alexander before returning to her. There was no open hostility in his manner. That made him more dangerous. Lunch began with trivial conversation. People spoke of weather, road conditions, a musical in Guildford, and the quality of strawberries that had not yet properly come into season. Priscilla answered when addressed, assisted Mrs. Marchmont over uneven ground, and refused to behave as though she had arrived for judgment. Yet she felt the glances. They came and went like insects over water. Some curious. Some sympathetic. Some measuring the distance between herself and Alexander whenever they stood near one another. Henrietta waited until the meal was nearly finished. Then, with the timing of a woman who understood attention as well as any actress understood a stage, she sighed softly over a remark about family mourning. Priscilla always felt such things deeply, she said. The conversation around them thinned. Priscilla set down her cup. Henrietta continued. After my sister died, she could hardly bear society. We did everything possible to protect her wishes. Mrs. Harbury, seated several places away, looked uncomfortable. Alexander said nothing. Priscilla could almost feel the restraint in him. Henrietta turned toward her with an indulgent sadness that might have fooled anyone who did not know its purpose. You asked us repeatedly to discourage callers, my dear. I fear grief has made the past confusing. The accusation was gentler than a slap and more difficult to reject because it wore concern. Priscilla answered evenly. I asked for quiet in the first months after my mother's death. I did not ask you to refuse gentlemen in my name for the following year. A lady near the rug looked down at her plate. Seymour leaned forward. Surely you cannot expect Aunt Henrietta to distinguish every preference you expressed while distressed. I expect her to distinguish mourning from consent. The words quieted the group more thoroughly than anger would have done. Henrietta's expression changed by half a degree. Consent is a dramatic term for a drawing-room door. It is an accurate term for deciding who may answer for me. Henrietta's eyes lifted to Priscilla's hair. The movement was small but deliberate. Then perhaps we should not speak of grief at all. You seem to have recovered from it very prettily. Priscilla knew before her aunt raised a hand what was coming. That comb, Henrietta said. Your mother's, if I remember. You would not wear it for months. Yet now, when His Grace takes an interest, suddenly mourning need not be so severe. A tiny silence opened in Priscilla's chest. For one instant she was back beside her mother's bed, holding that comb after the pins had been removed from thinning hair. She remembered the weight of it in her palm, the missing tooth her mother had laughed about years earlier, the promise Priscilla had never spoken aloud that she would keep something of hers that was useful and beautiful both. Henrietta had reached for the tenderest thing available because she thought tenderness would make Priscilla weak. Priscilla lifted her chin. The comb belonged to my mother. Henrietta smiled faintly. Exactly. Remembering her does not require me to disappear with her. Nobody moved. Mrs. Marchmont's hand tightened once over the head of her walking stick. Julia looked directly at Henrietta. Alexander's gaze never left Priscilla. Henrietta recovered first. No one asked you to disappear. Then we agree on something. Seymour gave a humorless laugh. Do we? Because the story appears to change whenever it suits you. Last year you wanted no gentleman. This year a duke arrives, and suddenly the family that respected your wishes is accused of silencing you. Alexander spoke at last. One fact does not change. Every head turned toward him. His voice was calm. I sent Miss Bexford a card on the 22nd of May. That card was returned to me. Henrietta looked at him. Because Priscilla had made her preferences clear. Alexander did not raise his voice. Not to me. She told me to return it. Priscilla turned fully toward her aunt. I did not. Henrietta met her gaze without blinking. You were upset that afternoon. I did not know the card existed. You may not remember the conversation. Seymour leaned in before Priscilla could answer. And there we have it. Are we truly to believe that your memory is flawless and your own family's word worthless merely because His Grace has chosen to take your side? The question was aimed beyond Priscilla, at everyone listening. She understood the trap. If she argued too fiercely, she became vindictive. If Alexander defended her with rank, she became dependent upon him. If she appealed to sympathy, Henrietta's story of emotional instability gained strength. Priscilla looked around the circle. I am not asking anyone to decide this today. Seymour blinked. Henrietta's confidence wavered. You are not. No. I know what I did not say. My aunt says otherwise. At present, I cannot prove the larger pattern. She rose. I will not beg people to believe me because I am hurt. Alexander stood at once, but he did not move in front of her. Priscilla noticed that. She noticed everything. Henrietta's voice sharpened. Walking away will hardly help appearances. Priscilla faced her. I am not responsible for making Fossard comfortable while I wait for truth. Then she turned to Mrs. Marchmorn. May we leave? Gladly. Julia joined them near the carriage. Alexander came last. He offered no public threat, no declaration that his rank should settle the matter. Only when Priscilla was safely inside, with Mrs. Marchmorn seated opposite, did he take the place beside her. Julia entered after him, her expression tight with contained anger. For several minutes the carriage moved in silence down the Box Hill road. Priscilla watched sunlight flicker through the trees and kept her hands folded too carefully in her lap. Then Alexander turned one palm upward between them. He said nothing. He did not reach. Priscilla looked at the offered hand and felt the strain of the afternoon gather behind her ribs. Slowly, deliberately, she placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers. Not tightly. Not possessively. Simply enough to remain. They held that way as the carriage rolled toward Dorking. Halfway down the hill, Julia leaned forward. I have news. Priscilla looked up. About the footman. Julia nodded. He has taken temporary work in Guildford. I know where. Priscilla's fingers tightened once around Alexander's. His did not move until hers did. Good, she said. Then she looked at him. I want to speak to him. Without you. Alexander's face changed, but he did not release her hand. All right. You mean that? I do. The road curved beneath them. Priscilla looked out toward the long green folds of Surrey and felt, for the first time that day, not vindicated, not safe, but free enough to choose what happened next. The morning after Box Hill, Priscilla woke before the maid brought hot water and lay still for several minutes listening to a house that did not require her to rise first. At Elmstead, mornings had belonged to other people before they belonged to her. There had always been a list, a misplaced key, a caller expected at noon, a servant asking which table linen Henrietta preferred, or Seymour wanting some errand completed without the inconvenience of admitting he had asked. At Mrs. Marchmont's house, duty had edges. It began at an agreed hour. It ended at another. The distinction had seemed modest when she arrived. Now, after the humiliation of Box Hill, it felt like a wall strong enough to lean against. Priscilla dressed carefully and fastened her mother's tortoiseshell comb into her hair. The amber-brown curve caught the morning light. One small tooth was still missing. She had never considered repairing it. The floor belonged to its history as surely as the carving did. Downstairs, Mrs. Marchmorn was already at breakfast with a stack of correspondence and a look that suggested she had been waiting to discuss something. Sit, she said. And before you object, this is not charity. Priscilla took the chair opposite her. That introduction makes objection difficult. Good. Mrs. Marchmorn slid a sheet of paper across the table. Our original agreement was sensible but temporary. I dislike temporary arrangements when both parties know they intend to continue. I propose we make the terms clearer. Priscilla read the page. The duties were much as before. Morning correspondence. Reading aloud after luncheon when required. Accompaniment on calls no more than 3 afternoons a week unless mutually agreed. 1 full afternoon each week entirely her own. Wages fixed quarterly, with board and lodging separate from payment. Travel expenses covered when Priscilla accompanied Mrs. Marchmorn on her business. There was also a line stating that either party might end the arrangement with reasonable notice. Priscilla read that line twice. Mrs. Marchmorn noticed. You may leave me if I become unbearable. And you may dismiss me if I become useless. No. If you become useless, I shall send for a physician. If you become unbearable, I shall dismiss you. Priscilla laughed softly. Then she looked down again. You truly mean to keep me? I employ you because you improve my days, not because a duke happens to be courting you. Mrs. Marchmorn buttered a piece of toast. If His Grace proposes tomorrow, you still owe me the work we agreed upon today until one of us gives notice. Something in Priscilla's chest eased. He has not proposed. Then we are both saved from hypothetical melodrama. Priscilla signed the agreement. The act was small. No witnesses applauded. No family fortune changed hands. Yet when Mrs. Marchmont added her signature beneath it, Priscilla felt the quiet dignity of being bound only by terms she had actually accepted. She folded her copy and placed it inside her writing case. She did not send word to Alexander about it. That decision was deliberate. She had no wish to use employment as a demonstration of independence for his benefit. The life was hers whether he admired it or not. Shortly before noon, Lady Julia arrived with the precise information she had promised. The former Elmstead footman had taken temporary work at a posting inn on the edge of Guildford, assisting during the absence of another servant. Julia had learned it through a housekeeper who knew the innkeeper's sister. No one had approached the man directly. "His name is Thomas Ede," Julia said. "I should have remembered it sooner." Priscilla did remember once the name was spoken. Thomas Ede. Quiet, punctual, rarely noticed unless something went wrong. That, too, felt familiar. How long will he remain there? Priscilla asked. A week, perhaps less. The permanent servant is expected back. Mrs. Marchmont sat nearby with her needlework, present enough to make the conversation respectable and silent enough not to interfere. "Then I should go tomorrow," Priscilla said. Julia nodded. "I can take you." "Thank you." Alexander offered his carriage as well. Priscilla looked at her. "Of course he did." Julia's mouth twitched. "He also offered himself." "Of course he did. I told him I would ask you." Priscilla considered the matter carefully despite having already told Alexander in the carriage that she wished to speak to the footman without him. A duke's carriage could still announce more than she wanted. His crest on a panel. His liveried servants. His horses. Every detail might turn a quiet conversation into an event before a word was spoken. "I would rather use your carriage," she said. "Without Alexander." Julia did not challenge her. "That is what I expected. And I should like Mrs. Marchmont to come, if she is willing." Mrs. Marchmont looked up. "My knee objects to Guildford roads. My curiosity overrules it." "Then 3 women will visit Mr. Ede," Priscilla said. "No duke. No solicitor. No offer of employment. No money." Julia's expression grew thoughtful. "You realize Seymour may already have frightened him?" "Yes." "And if he refuses to speak?" Priscilla felt the weight of the question. Thomas Ede might know exactly what Henrietta had done. He might know whether callers had been turned away repeatedly. He might know who gave the orders and whether Seymour reinforced them. Or he might decide that truth was less valuable than the next household reference on which his livelihood depended. Priscilla had no right to demand bravery from a man who possessed less social protection than she did. "Then he refuses," she said. "I would rather lose perfect evidence than make him think he owes it to me." Mrs. Marchmont's needle stopped. "Good." Julia looked at Priscilla. "Alexander will dislike it. I am not asking him to enjoy my decision." "No," Julia smiled faintly. "That may be why he keeps making such inconvenient progress." Alexander arrived later that afternoon. He had evidently been told enough by Julia to know the subject of the conversation, but not its outcome. Priscilla was finishing a letter for Mrs. Marchmont when he was shown into the drawing-room. He waited until the sheet was sanded, folded, and set aside before speaking. "My sister tells me you have found the former footman." "We have found where he is working." "Guildford?" "Yes. I can have a carriage ready at any hour. Lady Julia has offered hers." His face gave nothing away for a moment. "Very well. And I do not want you to come." That landed more visibly. Not anger. Instinct. The almost physical urge to object moved through him and stopped behind his eyes. "May I ask why?" Because if Thomas Ede sees the Duke of Wenslade waiting beside me, how free will his answer appear? Alexander was silent. Priscilla continued. If he supports me, Henrietta will say you purchased him. Seymour will say he feared you. If he refuses to speak, he may believe he has offended a duke. I need him to meet Priscilla Bexford, not your influence. I would not threaten him. I know. I would not offer him money. I know that too. His gaze sharpened. Then this is not about whether you trust me. No, she paused. It is about whether anyone else could trust what happened afterward. That answer reached him. She saw the moment it did. Alexander turned slightly toward the window, then back. You have considered this more carefully than I have. I have had practice thinking about what people believe when they cannot see the truth. He breathed out slowly. I want to go. I know. I want to hear the man myself. I know. I dislike that Seymour may have reached him first. So do I. His mouth tightened. And yet you want me to stay away? Yes. A long silence followed. Priscilla did not soften the request. He had crossed Surrey through the night because someone had answered for her once. He could not now prove he understood by insisting that his own judgment replace hers. At last he nodded. Then I shall stay away. She searched his face. Even if Julia sends word that the meeting has become difficult. Unless you ask for me. Even if you think I am handling it badly. A faint, rueful expression touched his mouth. That condition appears designed specifically to wound my pride. Does it? Yes. He held her gaze. I accept it anyway. Warmth moved through her, quiet and dangerous. Thank you. Do not thank me yet. I may spend tomorrow pacing holes into Cranley Park. That is your flaw's concern, not mine. He laughed. Then his expression softened. Priscilla. It was the first time he had used her given name without the shelter of formality. She felt it immediately. He seemed to realize it as well. Neither of them corrected the moment. I rode all night because I could not bear that someone else had answered for you, he said. I should be a poor student if I tried to do the same thing now. Priscilla looked at him and understood that his restraint cost him something. That was what gave it meaning. The next day, she would go to Guildford without his rank beside her. She would ask Thomas Ede what had happened at Elmstead's door. He might tell her everything. He might tell her nothing. For once, the uncertainty did not make her feel powerless. The method was hers. The question was hers. And whatever answer came, no one would be able to say she had forced it from another person in the name of freedom. Alexander learned of Seymour's threat at 9 o'clock on the morning of the 4th of June, while standing beside an open window at Cranley Park with every instinct in him demanding a horse. Lady Julia had arrived before breakfast was cleared. She carried no letter from Priscilla, only a message obtained through the same household connection who had traced Thomas Ede to Guildford. The former Elmstead footman had not yet agreed to meet anyone. More troubling, a man from Seymour Kirkham had found him first. Not Seymour himself? Alexander asked. No, Julia said. A groom who still has friends at Elmstead heard enough to understand what was offered. Ede may have a favourable reference if he leaves Surrey quietly. If he contradicts the Kirkhams, he may have none. Alexander stared across the lawn without seeing it. The message transformed irritation into something colder. A servant's reference could decide where he slept next month, what household would employ him, whether a respectable master would trust him near silver or family rooms. Seymour did not need to threaten poverty openly. He needed only to suggest that one sentence could follow Ede from door to door. Where is Seymour now? Alexander asked. Julia's eyes narrowed. Why? Because I intend to speak to him. No, Alexander turned. His sister rarely used that tone with him now that they were adults. It was the same tone she had used at 17 when he attempted to ride a horse with a split girth because he believed confidence could replace leather. Priscilla asked you to stay away, Julia said. From Ede. From anything that could make his testimony look compelled. Seymour is not Ede. And if you confront Seymour today, what happens tomorrow? Ede speaks, and Seymour tells Surrey the Duke frightened everyone into agreement. Alexander's hand tightened against the window frame. He is threatening a man's livelihood. Yes. And you expect me to watch? I expect you to decide whether stopping Seymour for one afternoon matters more than preserving Priscilla's right to establish the truth without your rank over it. The accuracy of the question irritated him because it left no honorable escape. Alexander had crossed 30 miles in darkness because another person had answered for Priscilla. He could hardly claim that journey as proof of devotion and then substitute his judgment for hers the first time restraint became unpleasant. He walked away from the window. What has Priscilla asked for? Only information. She wishes to know whether Ede will meet her voluntarily. And if he refuses? She says he refuses. Alexander let out a breath that carried no relief. Does she understand Seymour may send him out of Surrey before she speaks to him? Perfectly. That does not trouble her. It troubles her enough that she has chosen not to solve the problem by frightening him from the opposite direction. He looked at Julia. You enjoy quoting her when she is right. It saves time. Alexander almost smiled. It vanished quickly. Very well. I shall not go to Guildford. I shall not speak to Seymour. I shall not send a servant to Ede. Julia studied him. Nothing? Nothing unless Priscilla asks. That may be the hardest order you have obeyed since leaving the army. It is not an order. That, Julia said, is why it is harder. After she left, Alexander attempted to attend to estate correspondence. He signed 2 instructions, corrected an account, and read the same paragraph concerning a tenant boundary dispute 3 times without understanding a word of it. By noon, he had abandoned the desk and walked the south terrace until his steward appeared at a distance, observed the Duke's expression, and wisely turned toward the stable yard instead. Alexander had once waited beneath artillery fire for a signal he could not give himself. That memory should have made the present absurd. Instead, he discovered that waiting for Priscilla's choice felt worse because no duty protected him from wanting an outcome. In battle, obedience had structure. Here there was only uncertainty. If Ede refused, Alexander could not fix the refusal without contaminating it. If Ede left Surrey, he could not drag him back. If Henrietta's story prevailed among those who preferred family respectability to a poor relation's word, Alexander could not simply order society to think better. He could state what he knew. He could stand beside Priscilla. Beyond that, the truth had to survive without the weight of Wenslade pressing upon it. Late that afternoon at Dorking, Priscilla received a less encouraging version of the same news. Lady Julia sat across from her in Mrs. Marchmont's drawing-room, gloves still on from the road. Mrs. Marchmont occupied the chair nearest the fireless grate with a book open but unread in her lap. Thomas Ede knows you wish to speak with him, Julia said. He has not said yes. Priscilla kept her hands folded. Why not? He is frightened. Of Seymour. Of what comes after Seymour. Julia paused. He has been offered a good reference if he leaves the county quietly. He believes another position may be available through a household connected with the Kirkhams. Mrs. Marchmont gave a dry sound. Generosity has remarkable timing. Priscilla felt disappointment first, then shame for feeling it. Thomas Ede had no obligation to sacrifice future employment so that she might recover choices already lost. She had promised herself she would remember that. It was harder now that the truth stood close enough to touch. Has anyone told him what I want? Only that you would like a conversation. Nothing about money. Nothing. Nothing about His Grace helping him afterward. Nothing. Priscilla looked toward the window. Somewhere beyond the hills lay Guildford and a man being asked to choose between truth and security by people who would suffer less than he did from either answer. She understood too well what it meant when choice existed only in appearance. Then he needs to hear more clearly what I do not want. Julia leaned forward. What shall I say? Tell him I will not pay him. Mrs. Marchmont raised one eyebrow. An unusual invitation. Tell him I cannot promise him employment. I will not ask the Duke to employ him. I will not promise that speaking will improve his circumstances. Priscilla paused. And tell him that if he meets me, I want only what he remembers to be true. If the truth does not help me, he must still say it. Julia's face softened. And if he refuses? Then I will not send again. The words hurt, but they remained steady. He has already spent years opening doors for people more powerful than he is. I will not make him believe he must open this one for me. Mrs. Marchmont closed her book. There are women with twice your fortune who would not understand that. Priscilla shook her head. Fortune makes understanding optional. Julia rose. I can have the message carried this evening. Through the housekeeper's connection only. No Wenslade servant. Alexander has given the same instruction. Priscilla looked up. He has? Julia's smile held sympathy and amusement in equal measure. He wanted to ride to Guildford this morning. Priscilla could imagine it too easily. Alexander already mounted. Orders given. Seymour confronted before luncheon. The thought should have annoyed her. Instead, warmth touched the edge of her worry. What stopped him? You did. I was not there. Apparently that was part of the difficulty. Julia's expression became quieter. He said he would make no contact with Ede, Seymour, or Henrietta unless you asked him to. Priscilla looked down at her hands. The restraint mattered because she knew what action cost Alexander less. He had built a life around decisions. To stand aside now was not passivity. It was trust offered without certainty that it would be rewarded. Did he say anything else? She asked. Julia considered whether to answer. He said waiting feels worse than battle because he cannot command the outcome. Priscilla's throat tightened. That sounds very dramatic. He was not being dramatic. That is why I remembered it. The message left for Guildford before dusk. No answer came before dinner. None came while Priscilla read aloud to Mrs. Marchmont that evening. She reached the end of 2 pages without understanding them and was gently instructed to begin again. At 9:30, wheels stopped outside. A servant entered with a folded note addressed to Lady Julia. Julia opened it, read 3 lines, and looked across the room. Priscilla rose. Well. Thomas Ede will meet you. Relief came so sharply that Priscilla had to breathe before speaking. When? Tomorrow afternoon in Guildford. On his terms. On yours and his. He wants Mrs. Marchmont and me present. No Duke. No payment. No promise of employment. Priscilla closed her eyes for one brief second. Good. Julia folded the note. He also says there are things about Elmstead's front door you have never been told. Priscilla looked toward the darkened window, where her reflection stood alone against the glass. Tomorrow, someone who had spent years answering Elmstead's bell would finally tell her what had happened on the other side of it. Guildford seemed too ordinary a place to contain the answer to several lost years of Priscilla's life. On the afternoon of the 5th of June, market carts still rattled over the stones, shop bells rang, and inn servants crossed the yard with folded linen as though nothing more serious than dinner depended upon the hour. Lady Julia's carriage stopped near the posting inn where Thomas Ede had found temporary work. Mrs. Marchmont descended slowly because of her knee, refusing assistance until the last step. Priscilla followed with her hands cold inside her gloves. She had imagined this conversation too many times during the journey. In one version, Ede confirmed everything. In another, he denied remembering any unusual instruction. In the worst, he refused to speak and looked at Priscilla as though she were merely another member of a family asking a servant to choose which powerful person to displease. She reminded herself of what she had promised. Truth or nothing. No pressure. No purchase. No Duke. They were shown into a small private parlour at the back of the inn, plainly furnished with a round table, for chairs, and a window overlooking the yard. Thomas Ede entered several minutes later. He was perhaps 30, neatly dressed despite the temporary nature of his position, with the reserved posture of a man trained to occupy a room without appearing to do so. Priscilla remembered him more clearly now. At Elmstead he had always moved quietly, carrying cards, announcing names, opening doors. She had rarely asked anything personal about him. The realization caused a small, painful shame. "Miss Bexford," he said with a bow. "Lady Julia." "Mrs. Marchmorn." "Mr. Ede," Priscilla replied. He remained standing. "Before we begin, I want to repeat what Lady Julia has already told you. You owe me nothing. If you wish to leave now, you may." Ede looked at her with visible surprise. "I was dismissed from your aunt's house." "I know. Mr. Kirkham says I was insolent." "Were you?" "Once." Mrs. Marchmont's mouth twitched. Ede continued. "But not about this." Priscilla gestured toward the empty chair. "Please sit." He did. Julia and Mrs. Marchmorn remained present but silent. Priscilla kept her voice level. "I want only what you personally remember. If something I believe is wrong, tell me." Ede glanced toward the door, then back at her. "Very well. When gentlemen called specifically for me at Elmstead, what were you instructed to say?" His face changed. Not dramatically. The change was smaller, the look of a man deciding whether fear would speak before conscience. "That you were not receiving." Priscilla heard the words and still felt unprepared. "Who gave that instruction?" "Mrs. Kirkham." "Once?" "No, miss." He swallowed. It was a standing instruction. Julia's fingers tightened in her lap. Priscilla did not look away from Ede. "For how long?" "I cannot say exactly. It became regular after your mother died. At first I thought it was temporary. Later, whenever a gentleman asked for you specifically, I was to say that Miss Bexford did not receive gentlemen unless Mrs. Kirkham had approved the call." "Approved it how?" "If the card went first to her and she said you would receive, then I announced the gentleman. If she said no, I did not." "Did I ever give you that instruction?" "No, miss." "Did I ever tell you that I wished all gentlemen turned away?" No. Priscilla's breath caught, but she kept her hands folded. "What happened to their cards?" "Usually they went to Mrs. Kirkham." "And then?" "Some remained with her. Some were returned. Sometimes I was told to say you were indisposed. More often I was simply told that you were not receiving." Mrs. Marchmont's expression had gone still. "Did callers ever try again?" Priscilla asked. "Some did. A gentleman from Reigate called twice last autumn. The second time Mr. Kirkham told me to make it plain that another visit would be unwelcome." Priscilla thought of Mrs. Harberry's brother. The pattern was no longer a suspicion. It had shape, repetition, and a voice other than her own. "Now tell me about the Duke of Wenslade's card on the 22nd of May. Ede looked down briefly. "That one was different." "Why?" "Because of the writing on the back." Mrs. Kirkham turned it over, read it, and looked angry. Lady Julia was in the room. "I remember because Mrs. Kirkham covered the writing with her hand almost at once." Julia nodded once, confirming without interrupting. Ede went on. "Mrs. Kirkham told me it was a mistake and ordered me to return it to Wenslade House." "Did she say I had refused his grace?" "She said there was no need to trouble you with it." Priscilla felt a sharper pain than she had expected. Not because Alexander had wanted to call. She already knew that. The pain came from the ease of Henrietta's assumption that information about Priscilla's own life could be judged unnecessary before it reached her. "And you returned the exact card?" "Yes, miss. I carried it to the servant sent back toward London with other household business. I did not copy it or keep anything." The unique card therefore remained exactly where continuity and truth required it to remain, returned to Alexander and still in his possession. Priscilla nodded. What changed before you were dismissed? Ede's jaw tightened. Mr. Kirkham began asking whether anyone had spoken about the Duke's card. He told me that household confidence was part of good service. When I said Lady Julia had seen enough that silence would not matter, he became angry. Did he threaten you? Not directly at first. What did he say? That a footman who carried family business into other houses might find no respectable household willing to take him. Julia inhaled softly. Ede continued. After Box Hill, he said there could be a good reference if I left Surrey quietly and stopped repeating things that did not concern me. And if you did not? He said he could not be responsible for what Mrs. Kirkham wrote. The room remained silent. Priscilla understood then why this mattered beyond her own hurt. Henrietta had answered for her because Priscilla possessed less household authority. Seymour had tried to silence Ede because he possessed less social power. The method changed. The entitlement did not. Mr. Ede, she said, would you be willing to repeat what you have told us before my aunt and the people who heard her accusation at Box Hill? Ede looked directly at her. Yes. But I have a condition. Name it. His Grace must not pay me. He will not. He must not give me a position afterward. He will not, unless at some later time you seek ordinary employment through an ordinary application and the matter is entirely separate. Ede seemed relieved by the precision. I would rather not even have that appearance attached to this. Then it will not be. And I want it known that I am speaking because the instruction was wrong, not because I expect reward. Priscilla felt something tighten behind her eyes. I understand. Ede stood. Then I will speak. The meeting ended without triumph. Outside, Guildford continued as before. Yet when Priscilla stepped into Julia's carriage, she felt the strange grief of a woman receiving proof that she had not imagined her loneliness. The truth gave her justice, but it could not return the autumn afternoons when she had sat inside Elmstead believing no one came. On the 6th of June, Alexander called at Mrs. Marchmont's house. Priscilla met him in the drawing-room with Mrs. Marchmont seated near the window and Julia close enough to satisfy propriety while pretending to examine a book. Alexander's eyes searched Priscilla's face the moment he entered. You saw him? Yes. And? He confirmed it. Alexander's expression hardened, but he said nothing. Priscilla told him the essential facts. The standing instruction. The cards. The returned Wenslade card. Seymour's threat. Ede's willingness to speak under one condition. He does not want money or employment from you afterward, she said. Alexander nodded immediately. He will have neither. You are not offended? No, not even a little. Priscilla, I spent yesterday wanting to interfere so badly that Julia threatened to hide my boots. Julia looked up. I considered it. Alexander continued, but you asked me to stay away. So I stayed away. Priscilla studied him. You kept your word. I said I would. You made it sound difficult. It was. The honesty undid her. She had expected patience. She had not expected him to admit the cost of it. For months, perhaps years, people had treated her choices as obstacles to be managed. Alexander had wanted to act and had chosen not to because her method mattered more than his comfort. Priscilla crossed the small space between them before she could think herself out of it. She put her arms around him. Alexander froze for one heartbeat. Then, only after she had already chosen the embrace, his arms closed carefully around her. He did not pull her tighter than she offered. He simply held her. Priscilla rested her cheek briefly against his coat and let herself feel relief without mistaking it for surrender. Thank you, she whispered. For what? For staying away. His breath moved above her hair. That may be the first time anyone has thanked me for doing nothing. Priscilla drew back enough to look at him. You did not do nothing. She thought of Elmstead's door, of Thomas Ede opening it for men she never knew had come, of Henrietta standing behind him deciding whose existence Priscilla was permitted to acknowledge. "Now I know what happened," she said. Alexander's eye sharpened. "What will you do?" Priscilla released him but did not step far away. "I will make her correct it." "Where?" She knew the answer before she spoke. "At Elmstead. At the same front door and in the same drawing room where she decided I was not receiving." On the morning of the 7th of June, Priscilla wrote to Henrietta for the first time since leaving Elmstead, and the brevity of the note cost her more than anger would have done. She did not accuse. She did not plead. She did not threaten exposure. She simply informed her aunt that she intended to attend Henrietta's usual Thursday receiving afternoon on the 10th and that the statements made at Box Hill concerning Priscilla's supposed wish to refuse gentlemen must be corrected before the same social circle that had heard them. Mrs. Marchmont read the note once, handed it back, and said, "Good." No drama for her to complain about. No softness for her to exploit. Priscilla folded the sheet. She will call it drama anyway. Then let her work for the invention. Lady Julia arrived before luncheon with confirmation from Thomas Ede. He would come to Elmstead on the 10th. He repeated his condition that no payment, position, or ducal favour be attached to his testimony. Priscilla had expected nothing else. "And you?" she asked Julia. "Will you speak?" "Only to what I saw. I saw Alexander's card in Mrs. Kirkham's hand on the 22nd of May. I saw enough of the reverse to know it was meant for you. Later that same afternoon, I learned you had never seen it. Nothing more." "Nothing more." Priscilla nodded. That restraint mattered. She wanted no testimony swollen by affection or indignation. Every person would speak only from direct knowledge. No one would be asked to believe Priscilla because Alexander loved her, because Julia liked her, or because Thomas Ede needed sympathy. The truth had endured too much interference already. It deserved plain handling. Alexander arrived at Dorking later that day, properly announced and admitted as any other caller would have been. Priscilla watched him enter Mrs. Marchmont's drawing room and felt an unexpected echo of the first morning at Elmstead. He was no longer mud-streaked or exhausted. His coat sat perfectly, his boots were clean, and nothing in his appearance revealed the man who had crossed Surrey in darkness rather than accept a false answer. Yet she had learned something more intimate than seeing him tired. She had learned how much effort it cost him not to act. Mrs. Marchmont set aside her embroidery. "Your Grace, we have decided how the 10th will proceed." Alexander glanced at Priscilla before answering. "Then I am prepared to be instructed." "You will attend," Priscilla said. "As a guest. Not as a duke. You cannot stop being a duke. A persistent inconvenience. But you can refuse to preside." He inclined his head. "I can. Thomas Ede will speak first about the standing instruction at Elmstead. Lady Julia will confirm what she personally saw regarding your card. You will speak only about sending the card and receiving the same card back." Alexander's hand moved almost unconsciously toward the inner breast pocket where he still kept the unique original when traveling. "And the card itself?" "You will bring it." "Of course. You will not give it to Henrietta." "I had not intended to." "You may show it. You may hold it. It remains yours until the matter is finished." He studied her with the faintest hint of admiration. "You have planned this carefully. I have had years of other people being careless with my choices." The room went quiet. Alexander's expression lost its humor. "What do you want from your aunt?" he asked. "A correction. An apology." Priscilla considered it. "Only if it is real. A forced apology is another performance. I want her to say before the people who heard her accusation that I never instructed her to turn gentlemen away. And Seymour. If he denies threatening Mr. Ede, I will ask him directly. If he tells the truth, that will be enough for me. If he does not, Thomas will have already spoken." Alexander leaned back slightly. You have left me very little to do. Does that trouble you? More than it should. Mrs. Marchmont gave a small cough that sounded suspiciously like amusement. Alexander looked toward her. You see my difficulty. I see a man discovering that usefulness and control are not synonyms. Everyone appears determined to educate me. You have the advantage of surviving it. Priscilla smiled, but Alexander's gaze remained thoughtful. Later, when Mrs. Marchmont withdrew to rest her knee and Julia moved into the adjoining morning room with the connecting door open, Priscilla and Alexander were left with the restrained privacy propriety permitted. For several moments neither spoke. The afternoon light fell across the carpet between them. Alexander broke the silence. I have never wanted my rank less than I do now. Priscilla looked at him. Why? He did not answer immediately. That pause had become familiar. It meant he was choosing truth over ease. Because rank changes the weight of every yes I receive. She felt the seriousness beneath the words. You think people agree because you are Wenslade? Sometimes I know they do. He looked toward the open doorway, then back at her. In the army, command had purpose. Men needed orders. There were moments when hesitation was dangerous. I became good at deciding before everyone else had finished being afraid. And you carried that into peace. Yes. He gave a brief, humorless smile. I mistook decisiveness for a virtue that could never become a fault. Priscilla remained still. But with you, I find myself wondering whether agreement means anything if I have made disagreement too costly. The honesty entered her quietly. You have not made it costly. Not intentionally. That distinction matters. Not enough. He leaned forward, forearms resting lightly against his knees. At Box Hill, I wanted to end the conversation in one sentence. At Guildford, I wanted to find Ede myself. When Seymour threatened his reference, I wanted to remove the entire problem by force of position. But you did not. Because you asked me not to. Then the answer had meaning. Alexander met her eyes. That is what I am trying to learn. Priscilla felt warmth rise beneath her composure. There was no grand declaration in his words, no promise of protection large enough to become another cage. He was offering something harder. A willingness to become uncertain around her. You are learning quickly, she said. I had a severe instructor. You complain often for a willing pupil. It preserves my dignity. She laughed softly. His gaze changed at the sound. The air between them altered, not abruptly, but with the quiet inevitability of a door opening. Alexander stood. Priscilla did as well. He stopped at a respectful distance. May I ask you something that has nothing to do with Elmstead? You may ask. His hands remained at his sides. May I kiss you? Her pulse quickened. The question was simple. That was what made it powerful. Nothing had been assumed. Nothing had been earned by title, distance ridden, patience shown, or anger restrained. He asked because the answer belonged to her. Yes, Priscilla said. Alexander did not move immediately. Yes? Yes. She stepped forward and closed half the distance herself. Only then did he lift one hand, slowly enough that she could stop him, and touch her cheek with the back of his fingers before bending toward her. The kiss was gentle, brief at first, almost careful enough to be shy. Priscilla felt the restraint in it, and because she did not want restraint mistaken for uncertainty, she stayed close when he began to withdraw. Alexander paused. She lifted her face again. The second touch of his mouth to hers held more confidence, but no demand. When they parted, his forehead nearly touched hers. I have wanted to do that since Dorking, he murmured. Only since Dorking. I was trying not to alarm you. You rode through the night. Yes. My judgment has not been perfectly consistent. She smiled. Then the seriousness returned between them. On the 10th, you still stand beside me. Not in front. And if Henrietta refuses to admit anything? I speak only to what I know. Even if you are angry. Especially then. Priscilla looked toward the open door to the adjoining room, where Julia was deliberately turning a page she had not read. 3 days remained before Elmstead. 3 days before Priscilla would walk back through the front door as a guest rather than a dependent, carrying no appeal for rescue and no need to be believed on rank alone. This time, when the question of her life was asked in that drawing room, she intended to be the one who answered it. At 3 o'clock on the 10th of June, Priscilla Bexford crossed the threshold of Elmstead House as a guest. That single fact steadied her more than any speech could have done. The same front door stood open. The same marble floor reflected afternoon light. The same drawing room beyond held the polished silver, arranged flowers, and careful voices of Henrietta's receiving day. Yet nothing belonged to Priscilla's labor now. She had not ordered the tea. She had not checked the chairs. She had not written the notes that brought the guests. When the footman announced her, Henrietta's face tightened for one instant before social discipline restored it. Mrs. Marchmorne entered beside Priscilla. Lady Julia followed. Alexander came last, properly dressed, composed, and carrying no visible sign that the original Wenslade card rested inside his coat. Thomas Ede had arrived separately and waited in the hall until called, exactly as agreed. Several of the people who had attended the Box Hill picnic were present, including Mrs. Harbury and the 2 ladies who had heard Henrietta's accusation most clearly. Seymour stood near the fireplace, looking irritated rather than anxious. Henrietta crossed the room with an expression of injured civility. Priscilla, I had hoped we might discuss this family unpleasantness privately. Priscilla removed her glove slowly. It became public at Box Hill. Only because you insisted upon disputing me before others. Then correcting it before others should trouble you no more. A murmur moved and stopped. Henrietta glanced toward Alexander. Your Grace, surely you agree that private family matters should remain private. Alexander's voice was even. I am here only to speak to what I personally know. Henrietta's mouth tightened. Priscilla stepped farther into the room. She did not look to Alexander before speaking. Aunt Henrietta, when did I ever instruct you to tell gentlemen that I was not receiving? Henrietta gave a small sigh, as though the question exhausted her. You did so repeatedly after your mother died. When? Many times. Name one occasion. Henrietta's eye sharpened. Grief does not keep a diary, Priscilla. No. But servants keep instructions. Seymour shifted near the mantel. Priscilla turned toward the doorway. Mr. Ede, would you come in, please? Thomas Ede entered without livery and without the insignia of any grand household. He bowed to the room. Priscilla remained standing. Mr. Ede, while you served at Elmstead, were you given instructions concerning gentlemen who called specifically for me? Yes, miss. By whom? Mrs. Kirkham. Henrietta laughed once, softly. A dismissed servant. Priscilla did not turn toward her. What were you told? Ede looked directly at Priscilla. That Miss Bexford was not receiving gentlemen unless Mrs. Kirkham approved the caller first. The room became very quiet. Was that instruction given once? No, miss. It became a standing instruction. Did I ever give it to you? No. Did I ever tell you that I wished all gentlemen refused? No. Henrietta's voice cut in. Because I handled household matters for her. She was grieving. Priscilla faced her. Then why did you tell people at Box Hill that I personally instructed you to turn them away? Henrietta hesitated. It was the first hesitation Priscilla had seen from her in years. Seymour stepped forward. This is absurd. A servant cannot know every conversation between 2 ladies. No, Priscilla said. Which is why I am asking only about orders he personally received. She looked back at Ede. What happened when cards were left for me? Most were taken to Mrs. Kirkham. And afterward? Some were kept. Some were returned. Some gentlemen were discouraged from calling again. Mrs. Harbury inhaled. Priscilla did not look at her. And on the 22nd of May, when the Duke of Wenslade's card arrived, Ede's gaze shifted briefly toward Alexander, then returned to Priscilla. Mrs. Kirkham took it. She turned it over and read the writing on the back. Then she ordered me to return the same card. Did I see it? Not that I witnessed. Did Mrs. Kirkham tell you that I had refused his grace? No. She said there was no need to trouble you with it. Henrietta's face had gone pale. That is his recollection. Yes, Priscilla said. So we will add another. She turned to Julia. Lady Julia. Julia stepped forward. I was present on the 22nd. I saw Mrs. Kirkham take Alexander's card before Priscilla saw it. I saw enough of the reverse to know Alexander had written that it was for Miss Bexford if she permitted him to call again. Later that afternoon, I asked Priscilla why she had returned it. She did not know the card existed. Henrietta's composure cracked. You are his sister? Yes. Julia's voice remained calm. Which is why I am saying only what I saw. Priscilla turned to Alexander. He reached inside his coat and withdrew the cream card. The room seemed to lean toward it. He held it between his fingers. I wrote this card on the 22nd of May. I sent it to Elmstead House. The same card was returned to me later that day. I believed Miss Bexford had refused me, and I intended to respect that refusal. He turned it so the handwritten reverse was visible. I learned that night she had never seen it. Henrietta stared at the card. You cannot prove that Priscilla never asked me to protect her from unwanted callers. No, Priscilla said. But you can answer a simpler question. Did I ever instruct you to return that card? Henrietta said nothing. Did I? You had made your wishes regarding society perfectly clear. That is not an answer. Seymour moved abruptly. Enough. Everyone here understands what happened. Aunt Henrietta spared you embarrassment for years. You were a poor relation with no fortune. She kept foolish men from wasting your time, and now because a duke has chosen to notice you, you rewrite the past as persecution. Priscilla looked at him. Did you threaten Mr. Ede's reference? Seymour's expression changed. Of course not. Mr. Ede. Thomas answered without looking at Seymour. Mr. Kirkham told me that a servant who carried household confidence elsewhere might find no respectable family willing to take him. After Box Hill, I was told I could have a good reference if I left Surrey quietly. Seymour flushed. That is not a threat. It is common sense. Servants who betray household confidence don't deserve good references. The silence after his words was different from the others. It was final. An older gentleman near the window, who had until then said nothing, set down his cup. Mr. Kirkham, I had intended to recommend you to the agent of a Hampshire estate seeking a gentleman for a salaried administrative post. Seymour turned sharply. Sir, I shall not make the introduction. Seymour's face went white. No one needed to explain why. Priscilla looked back at Henrietta. Why? She asked. Her aunt's eyes flashed. Why what? Why keep callers from me? Henrietta's restraint finally failed. Because you were useful here. The words escaped before she could polish them. Priscilla did not move. Henrietta continued, anger gathering strength from exposure. You managed this house better than any paid woman would have done. You knew the accounts, the servants, the callers, the invitations. If you married, I would have been expected to replace all of that. Seymour would have had to concern himself with household expenses. And for what? So you could chase some unlikely prospect at your age. The truth entered the room without disguise. Seymour muttered, Mother. No, Henrietta snapped. She wanted independence. Very well. Independence has costs. Priscilla felt the old wound open, but this time it did not hollow her out. It clarified everything. You did not protect me from disappointment. Henrietta looked away. I kept you sensible about your prospects. Priscilla's voice remained quiet. You did not keep me sensible. You kept me uninformed. No one stirred. You were entitled to ask me to remain. You were entitled to tell me that Elmstead depended upon my work. You were entitled to offer wages, gratitude, or a reason. You were not entitled to answer other people in my name. Henrietta's eyes glistened with fury more than remorse. And what do you want now? An apology on my knees. No, Priscilla glanced around the room. I want the correction you owe. Henrietta's face hardened. Priscilla. At Box Hill, you said I instructed you to refuse gentlemen after my mother's death. Was that true? A long pause followed. Then Henrietta said, no, louder, please. Seymour made a sound of protest, but Henrietta silenced him with one look. She faced the room. Priscilla did not instruct me to refuse gentlemen on her behalf. She did not tell me to return the Duke of Wenslade's card. I acted according to what I believed best for this household. Priscilla held her gaze. Thank you. Henrietta looked as though the words hurt more than accusation. Before the gathering could turn into spectacle, Alexander spoke. There is one point I wish to make clear. Everyone looked at him. Miss Bexford never summoned me. She never engineered a quarrel to bring me to Surrey. I came because I wished to court her. Nothing more. No threat. No triumph. Exactly what he knew. Priscilla felt something inside her settle. The correction was complete. Henrietta would have to hire the housekeeper or secretary whose paid labor Priscilla's presence had allowed her to avoid. Seymour would leave Surrey without the comfortable recommendation he had expected. None of it restored lost years. Justice rarely returned time. It returned ownership of what came next. Later, in the small morning room across the hall, Julia remained near the open doorway while Priscilla stood with Alexander beside the window. He had given her the original card after the confrontation. It now rested in her hand, no longer proof of a refusal she had never made but evidence of a question finally returned to its rightful owner. You kept your word, she said. Again. I am becoming predictable. I hope not entirely. His expression softened. Priscilla. She looked up. The restraint she had come to trust was there, but so was something more vulnerable. I love you, he said. No rank could hide inside those words. No rescue. No bargain. Her answer came without fear. I love you too. Alexander lifted a hand to her cheek and waited the smallest fraction of a moment. Priscilla closed that distance herself. Their kiss was warm, certain, and freely returned. When they parted, his forehead rested lightly against hers. I will not ask you for anything today, he murmured. Good. Not even when I may call again. She smiled. That answer, Your Grace, I will give you myself. Through June, July, and August, Priscilla discovered that happiness did not arrive as a reward placed neatly in her hands after injustice ended. It arrived as ordinary days she was finally allowed to choose. She remained in Mrs. Marchmont's household near Dorking because she had given her word and because the position mattered to her beyond necessity. Alexander never asked her to leave early. He called when her duties permitted, joined Mrs. Marchmont for tea, endured discussions about household accounts with more attention than politeness required, and learned that Priscilla became impatient when tired, disliked overly sweet preserves, and could spend 20 minutes searching for a misplaced page only to discover it beneath her own elbow. She learned equally unromantic things about him. He became too quiet when estate business angered him. He expected decisions to be made quickly because delay still felt like danger. He had an alarming tendency to solve practical difficulties before anyone else had decided whether they wanted them solved. Once, in July, he arranged without asking for a carriage to take Mrs. Marchmont and Priscilla to Guildford after hearing that the widow's usual horses were unavailable. The carriage arrived before breakfast. Priscilla looked through the window, saw the Wenslade crest, and turned toward Alexander, who had come personally to announce what he clearly expected would be welcomed. "You arranged that?" "Yes." "Without asking me?" His confidence faltered. "I thought it would save Mrs. Marchmont discomfort." "It would." "Then what is wrong?" Priscilla folded her hands. "Nothing about the carriage is wrong. The assumption is—" He stared at her for a moment, then glanced toward the waiting vehicle. "You are going to refuse it?" "Yes." "To make a point?" "No. Because I already arranged another carriage yesterday." Alexander closed his eyes briefly. "Of course you did. You are annoyed." "At myself?" "Good." His eyes opened. "That seems severe. You survived the army." "Barely, according to Julia." Priscilla smiled despite herself. Then she touched his sleeve. "Alexander, I do not want you to become afraid of helping me." His expression softened. "What do you want?" "I want you to ask whether help is needed." He covered her hand lightly with his. "Then I will ask." The disagreement ended without withdrawal, wounded silence, or punishment. Alexander stayed for luncheon. Priscilla remained irritated for another half hour, then stopped being irritated because affection did not require performance. That realization stayed with her. She had once believed security meant never displeasing the people on whom she depended. With Alexander, she learned that disagreement could pass through a room without destroying what lived inside it. By late July, Henrietta had hired a housekeeper and a secretary for Elmstead. The news reached Priscilla through Lady Julia, followed several weeks later by a letter in Henrietta's own hand. It was not a graceful apology. Henrietta admitted that she had treated Priscilla's labor as though affection made payment unnecessary, that she had interfered with callers because she feared losing the order Priscilla brought to the house, and that her actions had been wrong. She did not ask to be forgiven immediately. Priscilla read the letter twice, then placed it in the drawer beside Alexander's returned calling card, which she had kept since the confrontation. She answered after 3 days. Her reply was courteous and honest. She accepted the apology. She did not promise that trust would return simply because regret had arrived. Henrietta wrote once more and, for the first time Priscilla could remember, did not argue with a boundary. Seymour left Surrey before August ended. Without the recommendation he had expected, he accepted salaried employment farther west, obtained without Henrietta's influence or Alexander's interference. Priscilla felt no triumph when she heard. She only thought that perhaps labor honestly named would teach him something unpaid dependents never had. September came with shorter evenings and the first yellowing leaves along the Dorking lanes. By then Alexander's courtship had lost every trace of rescue. He had seen Priscilla at work, seen her refuse invitations because Mrs. Marchmont needed her, seen her laugh until she lost composure, and seen her tell him he was wrong without fearing he would leave. She had visited Cranley Park with Mrs. Marchmont and Julia, watched Alexander speak with tenants, listen to his steward, and admit when an estate decision needed reconsideration. The Duke, who had once ridden through the night because he could not bear a false answer, had learned to wait for real ones. One September afternoon, Alexander walked with Priscilla beneath a line of beeches at Cranley Park while Julia remained within proper sight behind them. He stopped where the path opened toward the house. "I have rehearsed this," he said. Priscilla looked at him. "That sounds dangerous." "It became worse every time." "Then perhaps you should abandon the rehearsal." He breathed out a laugh. "Priscilla, will you marry me?" There was no audience close enough to hear. No scandal left to resolve. No household from which she needed escape. Her wages were still hers. Her position remained hers until she chose to leave it. Alexander stood before her not as a solution but as the man she loved. "Yes," she said. His expression changed so quickly that tenderness struck her almost painfully. "Yes?" "Yes, Alexander." "You are certain?" "Do not ruin this by becoming absurdly conscientious." "I am trying to respect the answer." "Then respect it." He kissed her only after she smiled and reached for him first. The marriage took place in autumn with ordinary dignity, proper marriage articles, family witnesses, and no hidden condition waiting to transform affection into obligation. Mrs. Marchmorne complained that losing an excellent companion was proof of Alexander's selfishness and then cried discreetly through part of the ceremony. Lady Julia did not bother to be discreet. Henrietta attended at Priscilla's invitation, subdued but correct, and for once allowed an event involving her niece to proceed without managing its meaning. Several weeks later, Cranley Park held Priscilla's first county at-home afternoon as Duchess of Wenslade. She stood in the drawing-room while autumn light moved across the windows and voices sounded in the hall beyond. Her mother's tortoiseshell comb rested in her hair, amber-brown beneath the light, wheat ears still carved along its curve, one small tooth still missing. Alexander stood nearby speaking with Julia when the footman entered carrying a neat stack of visiting cards on a silver salver. He approached Priscilla directly. "Your Grace, shall I say you are receiving?" For one heartbeat, memory moved through her. Elmstead. Henrietta's hand closing over cream card stock. A servant instructed to answer before Priscilla knew she had been asked. Then the present returned. Her own house. Her own choice. Her own voice. Priscilla looked at the cards. "Bring every card addressed to me," she said. "I shall answer for myself." "Yes, Your Grace." The footman placed the first card directly into her palm. Alexander had come to stand beside her. He did not look over her shoulder. He did not read the name. His hand simply opened between them, offered exactly as it had been at the stile months before. Priscilla placed her free hand in his. His palm rested beneath hers, not around it. "Are you receiving?" he asked softly. She looked toward the drawing-room door, then back at the man who had crossed Surrey in darkness and learned, in loving her, that devotion sometimes meant arrival and sometimes meant waiting. "I am." Priscilla leaned toward him and kissed him once before the next guest was shown in. When she drew back, autumn light caught the amber edge of her mother's comb. The door opened. Another caller's card was carried across the room and placed directly into Priscilla's hand.